welcome to another exciting, fun-filled, expeditious episode of Radiorama, where, as the name implies, I show you how to work on radios. And that means anything that tends to run on glowing vacuum tubes from the 1930s through about the 1960s. And today we have this lovely pink Zenith clock radio. It says Royal 6. I assume that means that it has 6 tubes in it. So let's see if that's true. I guess the tubes are mentioned maybe underneath. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 6. Okay, it's probably there's two 12BA6s, and it's got, so that's going to give it just a little more sensitivity. Looks like it already has a phono connection. The clock is super loud, I can just hear it. So, Hubbard Radio and Television. Berkeley. Telegraph Ave. Huh. Has been a local radio. Yeah, we'll have to quieten down that clock. Full disclosure, I have COVID for the first time. I've never had it. And I was a good boy and got all my vaccines and boosters. But I got it last week. And I'm not trying to be political or anything, but I happened to have on hand a box of Paxlovid. And again, I've been recently vaccinated and boosted with the latest variant. And I took Paxlovid, and my symptoms had started to show maybe the day before. But I took it, and it's gone. Like, I'm still testing positive, and I have a little bit of a cough. But other than that, I feel kind of normal. So 3 cheers for Paxlovid. I don't know. I was so scared of getting this. I've been worried about it for years, and maybe not so much in the last year or so, because it seems like I don't know. Anyway, beyond that, let's get back into the radio. You can see the turn on. It says off radio and radio alarm. I don't think this set has a lot of wear on it, unless... Okay, this printing is done on the inside. Some of these sets, you'd see it with the printing on the outside, and people would wear off the labels. So this one is clearly inside the plastic, because I can't rub that. Well, I can't even feel the print. Sometimes these work, sometimes these don't. When it comes to Zenith, their quality is generally a little better.
Father Rocky with another Advent instant.
With limited quantity.
At Tennessee, Titans 3-0.
High temperature those nutrients.
Yeah, you can see it's a lot more sensitive than a 5-tube set. But that's why you got the Royal treatment. So, as with anything of this generation in this era, with this many miles on it, you should definitely take a look inside to see what's going on under the hood, because it's not good enough if you're restoring this for somebody to say, well, it works, here you go. It's only going to be worthwhile if you take a look inside and see, has anyone been under the chassis before? And if they've done so, what kind of quality work did they do? Is the set original? It has all the original capacitors in it? A lot of those need to be changed. No bones about it. Number 3, maybe it's virgin. Maybe it's never been touched. Maybe it's all original. I'm going to assume, just by how squeaky clean this thing is, and also that it is a Zenith, that it probably has the original capacitors in it. Here's another interesting thing I've seen on some of these Zeniths. I've never seen one that actually had all this installed, but I'm assuming, could have gotten options, which means you could have had an extra connection for an extra speaker. You could have a connection for headphones, or you could have a connection for both, apparently. Never seen one of these with that equipment, so I guess most people are like, screw it, what am I needing that for? It says receptacle for appliance not over 1100 watts. And what is that for? So, in the 50s, it was pretty popular to get a coffee percolator, and if you're an American, you know what that is. It's like a big coffee urn that percolates water through the top over the coffee grounds over and over again. And so the idea was that thing was in the kitchen. You had it filled up with water and the coffee grounds in the top for the next morning. You could set the alarm to go off, and when it did, it would turn on that receptacle. And that receptacle would in turn get the coffee going. So you could wake up and go in the kitchen and have music sweetly playing, and your coffee is ready for you at the ready. Pretty clever, if you ask me. So now I'm going to pull the back off, and we'll pull the chassis out, and we'll see what's going on underneath. All right, let's see what's going on inside here. And I think I'm going to stand by my statement here. Well, not stand by, but I'm going to suggest that this set may have never been worked on. And the reason I'm saying that is because 9 times out of 10, when someone would have taken this radio out, they probably would have undone that wire clip, and they wouldn't have put it back together neatly like that. Let me take a look at the screws underneath. Usually if someone's worked on it, you'll find some like blemishing on the screws and maybe the plastic surrounding them from the tools. I don't see that here. And if someone had been in here recently, they would have, even in the last like 30 years ago, there would have been some disturbance in that dust there. So I think this is original. The only thing that's not original, we've got 2 tubes in here that have been replaced, and that's the rectifier and the output. It's not surprising, so these guys kind of cook themselves versus the rest of them that are 12-volt filaments. So I'm going to take the chassis out and see what it looks like underneath there. And what I'm hoping is that maybe the clock will quieten down a little bit, because that would help me a lot. Because maybe this one's not so bad. I don't know, some of these Zenith clock radios take a while to take apart. Alright, I'll shut up and I'll take the chassis out. Here's another thing I'm going to do. I decided to unsolder the antenna because now that it's loose out on my bench, this cardboard will bend real easy. And this is a stupid design for the radio back. The cardboard's too thin. There's not a lot of structural support for it, and as a result, most of the times I get these sets in, this is all damaged, but this is in perfect shape. So I'll set it over here for safekeeping, away from the radio chassis. All right, if you've never worked on this model before, to get the chassis out, you need to take this dial indicator off. Otherwise, you can't slide it out. So it's held in with a little clip here. I can't remember which side you're supposed to undo. Well, I'm also doing it one-handed, which is unprofessional. But you'll need to pop this off and pull that off. Then you can push the case out after you unloosen these 2 screws under here, which I've already done. All right, well, I lied. I wound up having to take the whole thing apart. The clock is just too loud. It was sitting there. Let me plug it in and let you guys hear this thing. Whoops, that's the alarm. I don't want that to be on. Hold on. I'll turn the alarm off. All right. You hear that? I mean, no, it's stupid. I got the music going on too. Now imagine that being on someone's nightstand all night. That'd be annoying. So we need to solve that problem. But first I'm going to look at the radio. Well, here's the underside, and surprise, surprise. Actually, I'm not surprised at all. It's all original. No one has put a human hand inside of this since this was new. I worked on these enough to know like what capacitors came with these, and I feel like Zenith was using a lot of Pyramid and Goodall brand capacitors. Plus the wiring, you know, when you get someone that repairs things, typically they had to turn this stuff over really quick, so whatever repairs were done like sloppily. Often sloppily, I say. Plus you would know if they'd been worked on because you'd see the repair work, but I don't see any. So it's, again, functioning original on all its original electronics minus 2 tubes. That's pretty remarkable. Do you think any of the flat screen TVs we have will be working then? Probably not, but if you try to fix it, you're talking about dealing with things like logic boards and grain of sand sized capacitors. Like I have a lot of respect for people that can work on that stuff, but God, I can't imagine what it could possibly be like in the future if any of these modern electronics need a quote-unquote recap job. Because we're not talking about half a dozen capacitors. We're talking about thousands of capacitors. Luckily, the capacitor technology... I'm rambling, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm getting brain fog or something. But we need to replace the electrolytics first. That is a given. So, what I'm looking at is the values of the capacitors inside. There's an 80 microfarad and a 40 microfarad capacitor. I know they're rated at 150. It's a hot chassis set, rather a floating chassis set. But I just need to know like what shape is what. Usually on Zenith, the 80 is square. There we go, square, triangle, easy. So I need to replace the two capacitors inside of this with two net new ones. It's cheap insurance and it's easy to do. But I'll show you how to do that when I flip it back over. Okay, next step. What I've done is I've removed one of the leads from the underside of the electrolytic capacitor. And it has a little square punch out shape back here. Let's see if I can get a light on that better. See that? That square. So that corresponds with the shape that we saw stamped onto the can above. And then this is your positive. So I removed those, and the negative is here. And so what we want to do is replace each one of the two capacitors inside that can with two of these. We'll replace the 80 microfarad lead, which is here, with this 100 microfarad capacitor. And it's rated at 150 volts. And it's important that you, again, like, observe polarity. If you get it backwards, it'll explode. Alright, so I've replaced both of these electrolytic capacitors, and sometimes it's just a matter of being clever and where you mount them. I'm not suggesting I'm clever, by the way, but you can see here that brown disc. That's the mounting spot for the aluminum electrolytic can above it. And it is itself the floating ground. So you just need to make sure that the negatives of your new replacement electrolytic capacitors are also sharing that same floating ground, which is that disc. And so I just make sure that my negative leads on the new electrolytics are as short as possible, and I find places to get them in line with these connections. So what I'm doing is I'm using the old lugs off of the electrolytic capacitor as terminal strips. I know some people are like, oh, you have to have terminal strips for everything, but where's room in here? There's no room. So that makes the most sense. You can sometimes move stuff under wiring or under different things, but you know, I can't move these. They're stuck in place. We have two more capacitors, and one of these is more important than the other by far. And that is, even though this is a floating chassis design, that doesn't mean that the other side of the AC doesn't go to the chassis. It just gets to it passively. It goes through this capacitor. At least I think. I'm trying to remember which one is the chassis ground. Has to be this one because it's obscured by that disc right there, but there's a soldering connection of this capacitor to chassis. So that's our to the line capacitor, or to that's the other end of the AC line capacitor. And that's the wrong value, and it's the wrong type. We're going to replace it with a smaller value and a different type that will split open in case it's struck or zapped versus fusing together. Granted, it's rare that I've seen a completely shorted capacitor, but if it were to happen, you certainly don't want the other side of the AC line cap being the one that does it. The other one's just a conventional, probably 0.05 rated capacitor, something like that. Yeah, see, it says 0.047, 200 volts if you're good at reading upside down. So we'll replace those two, then we'll test it to make sure it's still working. And then it'll be time to move on to the clock motor. Alright, so let's see if it still works. We have our capacitors installed. There's that important X2, Y2 across the line rated cap to go to chassis ground. And I don't remember which one of the switches on the thing turns it on, but let's see. If that turns it on, no. I don't think so, because the pilot light's not on. Nobody home. Let's see. Is that the switch? Could be the pilot light is burned out. Let me look at what this thing says. Sorry, I'm doing a horrible job filming. Alright, that up top is the switch. So something should have come on. It's embarrassing. You know what? It has no speaker connected, so it's not going to make any noise anyway, and I'm probably damaging shit, so let me turn it off. Well, that's always fascinating. The radio doesn't work anymore. And I tried the switch. I also tried the timer. And there's no filament. So it's not turning on. Now, that could be anything. That could mean something as simple as one of the tubes. It might have been on its way out, decided to go out. Or it could mean there's a switch problem, or more than likely there's a wiring problem caused by me. So I'm going to flip it over and see if there's anything obvious, even though I can't imagine, because there's like 3 parts to replace. Okay, well, I did test the switch. The switch getting to the chassis works, so it's not a power problem. I'm also getting voltage there. There's 120. I think one of the filaments is open. And I'm thinking it's probably the rectifier, because otherwise I don't know. That's my hunch. These things get beat up real bad. So I'm going to replace probably both of those. I'll not replace both of those, but I'll go see if I have each one of these tubes, and I'll just throw them in there and see if it works. Okay, so something is shorting out here, or disconnected, and it's probably my fault. I tested all the tubes, they're fine. The switch is working, I'm getting voltage in here. So I think I might have broken a wire or something. We'll find out. Okay, I'm going to admit something really embarrassing. I sat there trying to figure out why I wasn't getting any power, and the reason is because on this one, you got to pull this switch out. You got to pull it on. It's something you don't see very common on radios. I feel like I saw them on maybe a few General Electrics and some other sets, but I think it's just not obvious to a lot of people to pull a knob on. I think it's because they were thinking that a lot of televisions at the time had that. It probably works. I don't have an antenna hooked up. I mean, it's even picking up something without an antenna. Very sensitive. Anyway, so now it's rebuilt with. I'm glad it's turning on again. I was like, man, am I losing my mind? Maybe COVID has something to do with it. I don't know. Just shows that even the dumbest things can really send you down a rabbit hole. All right, so let's talk about the next thing now that I've discovered my heinous mistake. We're going to run through the set's phono connection, which is here, and there's already a switch that's on the back of the chassis. And so we don't need to worry about decoupling the radio signal to the volume control. This already does that for us. I know some people complain about this. They're like, those radios weren't supposed to be, they weren't supposed to have audio running through them. And it's like, yeah, they were, and they made them all the way back in the 20s. So all I'm doing is adding that ability. And so whoever gets this can choose to listen to their music, or if they want to listen to the radio, they can do that too. But before we do that, we want to go through an isolation transformer, and it just so happens to be one of these. And the way I would describe it electrically is there's a primary and a secondary. The primary is 120 volts in, the secondary is 12 volts out. And we're going to run the audio through the secondary of this transformer, which is this side. It's got these little pins here. There we go. And our right and left channels are going to run through a pair of resistors, like so. And that way you'll be putting your right and left channels from your audio cable into true mono. You don't want to just twist the right and left channels together. The other side would be your negative. And then coming on the other side here, going to the radio. These transformers we found kind of have an effect on the audio quality when it comes to the radio. So we make kind of a little bit of a shunt. This is a little ceramic disc capacitor. It's 0.05 rated microfarads. And this resistor is half the value of the volume control. So usually about 250,000, 270,000, give or take. It's not that critical. And so we're going to run the audio coming out of here to here, and then because it's an isolation transformer, I can run the other side to chassis ground, no problem. And that way, when you flip this back and forth, the user will be able to choose audio or radio. There's no room inside the chassis to put it, and frankly, as small as that chassis is, I wouldn't want it in that heat anyway. The chassis is perfect looking, and I don't want to glue anything on top of it because there's really nowhere to put it. Like, anywhere I put it, it's either next to a tube, which means it's going to get hot, or it's too far away from the audio input, or the audio source, or audio input area with the volume control. So I think what I'm going to do is glue it inside the cabinet once I put it back together again. Before I do that, I want to make sure that I wired it up correctly, and I will probably run the wiring through here or maybe through there, because I just need skinny little wiring. Okay, so I've got this all wired up and did a test fire. We've got the switch in the phono selection, and we're running a little Bluetooth module through it, which is here. No, you're not going to get like amazing sound quality out of it. It is a clock radio after all, but it works, and that leaves the next thing I want to take care of, which is this clock. It's got a noisy rotor in it. That's the rotor. It's going to be a little bit tricky because this is kind of a fragile setup here. It's got these long coils of wire coming down, I'm assuming because it has something to do with, there's a dimmer, like there's a night light control for this thing, and it's supposed to theoretically dim that, brighten or dim that bulb there, which it doesn't seem like it's doing anything. Maybe it just needs to be cleaned or something. Oh well. Let me turn this over and perform a few other little things before I call the electronics done. But before I do that, let's go ahead and lubricate the tuning condenser bearings. There's one in the front with little ball bearings, and there's one in the back that doesn't have any ball bearings. And give that a few twists back and forth. And I'll start to work that in a little bit. And don't be like me and get oil on any of it. Alright, let's see if I can get a piece of paper towel for a second. I want to make sure to get that oil off of there. Alright. And what you want to do is kind of oil the stem on the inside of the chassis. I'm not going to do that right now. But it'll just make it feel nicer when you turn the knob. And I know that's stupid sounding, but part of the experience with vintage electronics is kind of like getting in touch with their physical nuances. I don't know what I'm talking about, guys. I'm really sorry. I feel like that my brain is not working today. Okay. So what next thing I need to do is take this off and get that to quit making that noise. Okay, so first of all, I want to make sure that none of this gets damaged. So I put this on top of a piece of cloth, and what we need to do here is take this drum out. And that's going to be a little bit tricky because there's a lot of stuff going to this. But what you do is you loosen this screw and this screw over here. You see how there's two halves? Those split in half, and you like pry those open like this. And you can generally lift that drum out, or you can wiggle it out of there, but all this wiring and crap, and again, I don't want to damage any of it. Okay, so here's what you do is, see how I showed you that there's two screws on either end? Well, those are what hold that electromagnetic device, holds that down, holds this down, which is the rotor. And so this is the little keeper that goes over the top of them when you hold them down. It's a pretty ingenious design. It's very simple, but very effective, and when they work, they keep perfect time. I have a bunch of Telecron clocks in my house, and they keep perfect time, and some of them are pushing 100 years old. Unbelievable. So This part just needs to be oiled a little bit. Yuck, there's like a human hair in there. Ew. But what we're going to do is we're going to freshen the oil. And the way we're going to do that, I'm going to use this clear plastic tube and a little bit of zoom spout oil mixed together with a tiny bit of WD-40. I know that doesn't make any sense, but I'll show you what it looks like when I have this set up. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, as I mentioned, I filled up this little plastic tube with a little bit of light machine oil, in this case zoom spout oil, and maybe about 20% WD-40. You just want to make it kind of a little more liquid. And so I'm holding the soldering iron here kind of on the top of it. You see how that's starting to bubble? That's good. That's what I want it to do, because this is a hermetically sealed rotor. And there's a lot of people that I've seen where they'll have one of these that's either stuck or making a lot of noise, and their solution is to drill a hole in it and pour oil in it. And I don't like that idea, because then you're opening it up to the air. And the fact that these are hermetically sealed, I think that's what makes them so reliable. But we're just going to let this thing boil for a little bit. And what's going to happen is that when I quit doing this and I let it cool down, it's going to suck all that new oil in. And that's going to make it run a lot smoother and quieter. So it's going to let up. That seems like more than enough air has come out to, you know. Plus it mixes the oil and WD-40 together, so it's like double action. So when this cools off, you'll start, the reason it's clear, and I put a little mark here, you'll see this little red mark, so I can see how much has gone down in it. And if you want to speed it up a little bit, you can put it in the refrigerator, but I figure there's plenty of other things that need to get done before I do that, namely the plastic case over there needs a little love and attention too, so I think it's time to start cleaning it. Alright, now it's time to give the radio a bath, and I apologize for this loud washing machine. It's a generic General Electric washing machine, and I had one before it for about 13 years and it quit working on me. And I tried to fix it, and basically it was unfixable for reasons I don't want to go into because it's lame. And everyone said, well, you should get a Speed Queen. It's old-fashioned and American-made. It's a lot quieter and everything. And I looked them up. And it's going to be like $3,500. And I thought, well, the crappy General Electric one lasted for 13 years, which is not bad. And so they had the same model, same thing and everything, and it was like $1,200. It's like, I can't go wrong with that. Why am I telling you about my washing machine? No clear idea. But anyway, like I said, time to give the radio a bath. And what I'm going to do is just give it a little bit of spray with some cleaner. And then I have like a real soft bristle brush. What I'm really keen on is getting all of these little details cleaned up. I'll do a more thorough job when I'm not one-handed holding the camera, but I'm going to go over the whole thing like that and get it good and squeaky clean since all the guts are out of it. And since there are a lot of pain in the butt guts to put back in, I want to make sure and do a good job. And then it'll be time to, I think, just maybe some reassembling, or at least think about it. Okay, so that's way quieter. It's way quieter. So that's more bearable. You know, if you're just back here and you can't even hear it ticking away, then that's going to be more acceptable for sitting next to your bedside table. Even I remember when I was a kid, my grandmother had some sort of clock radio, and it made a horrible racket. But for some reason as a kid, I found it soothing to listen to. So who knows, maybe I should have kept this for me, so I could have had a nice noisy clock to keep my wife up at night and be permanently annoyed with me. Okay, now here comes the task of reassembling this, which is a challenge again because this plastic is so brittle, and there's not many things holding it back together again. So I'm just going to be gentle with reassembling it. I think what I'm going to do is actually use a little bit of glue as well for the front panel, just to make sure it's really secured. I have all of my hardware here. Usually I find when it's time to reassembly, if you can just match up your hardware, then you'll separate everything out. You'll just kind of know what's what. Like I know that those are probably my speaker screws. Those are all the screws holding the front panel on, I believe. And this is holding the case, the chassis to the case. So pretty straightforward. I want to clean up these knobs a little bit too before I do final assembly, but I'm not there yet. So again, I'm going to carefully put stuff back together again and be gentle. This plastic, it just shatters real easily, so you don't want to tighten your screws down too tight. Just want it to be holding it. Anyway, I got it all put back together, as you can see, and I spent a little more quality time cleaning up the plastic. The other thing I did is I bought some of these LED bayonet replacement bulbs, and some radios you can do that, some radios you probably shouldn't. This one I think you can get away with it, because not only does it have 6 tubes in it, but I replaced the 35C5 with a 50C5. That just means you've added a little more oomph to the filament string, and you'll get better life expectancy out of your tubes. It's kind of like the idea of like driving down your Christmas lights on a Variac 90% will give them 10 times the amount of life expectancy. At least that's what I've been told. Not sure what that has to do with radios, but I don't know. Anyhow, it sounds pretty good. That is the audio input. And then there's a little switch in the back. And then that's radio.
Nothing going for myself. I decided that.
That talk early on about Kelsey as he.
Do you think the United States
has repeatedly said that the reason for the tariffs is guns.
Like 40%, it took you 4.5.
But the trend is much broader. And every once in a while we'll win a game that we're expected to win football games. So everyone has to check themselves because everybody's.
That's weird. It like took a second to shut off. Why is that so?
Or at the locker room or wherever it might be, but leadership has to stand up now. These last 4, you got to stand up. You got to check people right now.
Well, I guess it turns off, but it just gradually does it. Anyway, that concludes this episode of Radiorama. I'll have to look into that just in case it is something weird. But in the meantime, that concludes this episode of Radiorama, and I hope you learned a thing or two and you were able to put up with all of my crap and shenanigans in this episode, because I know this is not a professional episode, so I apologize. Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Bye.